Hi, Joey, Tim, Cosette.
Hi there.
Hello, hello. Joey, your dog is so stoic. I remember, I remember him being in the same position as last week or the week before.
My, my dog, I was looking for my dog, but she's not in the room today. Usually
She's
she's like right here, but oh no, she just came in. So once
awesome.
she realized like someone's getting attention and it's not her, then she shows up.
She's just looking for a little love, aren't we all?
Yeah. She was, yeah, yeah. Oh,
What's her name?
this is Ellie. She just turned 8
Ellie.
recently.
Hi, Ellie.
I'll put her down.
All right. So spring's finally upon us. I live in Utah here, northern Utah, and it's quite nice out. It's always a welcome time of the season.
Yeah, I imagine Seattle spring is a little wonky because we get sun, but there's still a lot of rain, which is in some ways nice because we don't get much rain in the summer, and so we need
Is
it.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you skiing in you like spring skiing in Utah? I imagine is amazing.
It depends on what you're into. I'd
Okay.
rather have the cold and the deep powder.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I tore my meniscus 2 months ago, and my season kind of ended there. But had surgery last week, and which is why I wasn't around last week.
Hmm.
And everything's good, so I should be back on well, I'm already back on my feet, but I should be back at biking and jujitsu here in the next few weeks, I hope.
Wow. That's a quick recovery. I don't know what a meniscus tear is like, but that sounds
If you're just snipping out the part that tore, it's pretty fast. But if they're repairing it, which is they're sewing it together, I
yeah.
did that last year and it took like months. It was just a headache. So, hi Connie, hi Danita.
Hi, Eric. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, thanks
Hello.
for joining us. All right, cool. Let's just dive right in. So, I guess brief introduction, Connie, Danita. I do this on a weekly basis. I've been recruiting for the past 12 years or so, primarily for venture-backed tech startups. Everything from executive down to rank and file. In prior life, I was in product management and software development, and like many of you, I'm sort of faced with this. How is AI and how is this new world order going to be a headwind or tailwind as far as how I should think about my profession or my craft? And so, in many ways, I think a lot of us are in the same sort of boat here. But my goal here is to, sort of shed any light that I can in terms of the recruiter mindset, the hiring manager mindset, sort of the behind the scenes process as far as recruiting is concerned. So I ran two job search councils over the past year, and they've all since moved on. That's my connection with the Never Search Alone community. This is not just for the record, this is not a formal, like I'm not formally affiliated with Never Search Alone, in case anyone's wondering. It's just my sort of way of giving back and networking, right? So that's me. And the way we structure this is fairly unstructured, just sort of AMA. I don't have much of a program because I don't really have too much time to kind of dedicate to it. But just AMA, if you feel free to, holler out any questions or drop it um, in the chat there in the Zoom chat, and then we could just try to cover it.
So maybe I'll start first then, Eric. So first of all, thank you for like volunteering your
Yeah.
time to help people like us, right? So I actually have been on. I joined Job Search Council last year, but I've been job searching for over a year now. So my area of specialties is in financial services, mostly client service operation, middle office, and then you can imagine that is a dime and a dozen right now. So recently, I get myself involved a lot in AI. Basically, just really thinking about how can I take my past experience and all the challenges that I face in the financial service areas and then use AI and fintech to solve those problems and hopefully can find some frictional work, project work, and
Oh,
maybe like that's my approach personally. It's just that maybe can land me in a full-time position. So that's what I've been doing.
yeah, no, thanks for the introduction, Connie. So I've seen fractional be I've seen a lot of folks, well, over the past year and a half, I've seen a lot of folks struggle, especially folks that are at the more senior levels, more experienced levels, in terms of landing, their next position. And a lot of them end up just doing like fractional or consulting work in the meantime. And at least anecdotally, the response that I've gotten from them is that it's been a good way for them to, well, keep busy, stay sane, make some money, but also get some exposure um, to some, practical work could that could turn into a full-time position.
Mhm.
Not that it's always, not that that always is the case, but and so, being open to fractional work, I think has worked for a lot of folks, like, at least anecdotally. So, um, and then as far as like AI, I do a podcast. I don't claim to be a expert podcaster, but I'm learning. I started a podcast about a year ago. I've got 20 something episodes under my belt. But we talk a lot about the future of work. We talk
Mhm.
about AI. We talk about entrepreneurship. And I would encourage you, I'd love for you guys to check it out. We're on Spotify. It's called the Jump Search Talent Show. And and I have some, before I do the podcast, I do usually like a prep call just to make sure that the guests, like, there's overlap and there's sort of a chemistry between me and the guests. And I had a few calls this week, and some of the folks that I've been talking with have just been, it's just amazing, like how fast things are moving, as you guys are probably well aware of. But I think there's going to be this widening gap between folks that are early adopters and embracing the technology and incorporating it into their craft, into their career, into their profession. And I think that gap's going to be widening. So, not to fearmonger or anything, but if you're not if you're not immersing yourself in AI, I strongly suggest you start immersing yourself in AI and figuring out what it means for your profession, for your craft. I know that recruiting, as a recruiter, the days of what I was doing 2 years ago are gone. They're completely gone. And it took me a long time to sort of learn and accept that. Yeah. And so I'm sort of evolving myself to be um, um, maybe a creator of something that will replace or do what I was doing most of the time as a recruiter. I don't think it'll replace me entirely, but who knows? So everybody likes to think that the human aspect is so, how do you say, um, what's the word? I don't know the word. It's just so precious, right? But I mean, I can go an entire day without interacting with a person. I interact with ChatGPT all the time. And I can go all day. Maybe that's just me. I can go all day without interacting with a person sitting behind my desk. And not to say that's healthy, but it just seems like it's the way it's going. So anyway, hi Christine, welcome. But yeah, any questions? Any scenarios? Love to kind of try to tackle them and share my perspective. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I have some perspective.
If I could just add a comment on the AI thing, I'm on the skeptical end, and I think it's partly because I launched an AI product at Microsoft like 3 years ago, and so I'm like, okay, well, a lot of things that's amazing, but a lot of things doesn't work, and we're on the enterprise side. 90% isn't good enough. Um,
Mm.
but even then, I've been playing with just the AI image generation for fun recently, and again, I'm like very amazed at what it can do, and also very frustrated that I can't get things right. And so it's like it will save so much time. It can get you 90% of the way there. And but for like a professional thing that has to be right, I feel like you still need a human on the side to like step in and get you that last 10% there and
Yeah.
fix whatever that's broken.
Yeah. Fair enough. Um, it's so one of the things I came up in my conversation with one of the prospective guests was this idea of specialization and how I don't know over X amount of time in our recent past, there's been um, more value placed on specialization. And her thought, she has like an anthropology background, but she's deep into tech. And her perspective is that, and this is sort of the pre-podcast. So we're gonna have a podcast next month, but her perspective is that we're going from this place of specialization or increased specialization to more generalization, and the market will value that increased generalization. And so I'll give you an example for me. Like I'm developing like an offer page for this product that I'm selling, and I don't really know much about graphic design, but now all of a sudden I'm very capable as a graphic designer, and I can do something up to 95%, which before I would have to either it would take me a long time, or I'd have to farm it out to someone else if I want a high grade of quality, or I would just do it myself at a low grade of quality, right? So now I can do it myself at a high grade, a relatively high, good enough quality. And so it's just for me developing that intuition or as a designer, and now I can have this GPT like create illustrations for me. So anyway, just a thought there, but this is about I don't want to get too deep into like all this other stuff, but I do want to answer any questions related to recruiting and
I have a
maybe some of the challenges.
question.
Is that Danita? Who's that?
Yes, it's Danita.
Hi, Danita.
Um, so my question is, I recently had two interviews, and for in both instances, I was referred to the company by a former coworker.
Okay.
Um, but the problem is that I'm a senior or lead design level, but in both cases, these were mid-level jobs, but they were at really interesting companies to me anyway. And I made it clear to the recruiter that I was interested in the job as it was and in the range that they were hiring at. And I didn't care that it was mid-range. Um, but in both cases, I didn't go on to the next round. How would you suggest I approach this in the future?
That's challenging, man, Danita. I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head there. There's a lot of folks that I've talked with, especially at the executive level, and they've been searching for a long time, and they're at a point where like, man, I just need to sandbag my resume, and I need to sandbag my experience so I can get that whatever that VP or that director level role. And it's kind of sad that one would have to be in a situation to do that. Because, well, so just to give you a sense, and maybe you already have sort of an inkling for this, but the concern on the part of the recruiter and the company is that you could be a flight risk, right? And that
Mhm.
that the opportunity may not be big enough for you or challenging enough for you, and that you would just be taking it as a stopgap, right? And so that's part of the risk that usually crosses their mind, right? Is they might spend all this time and money hiring you, and maybe in 12 months or whatever, you're off, you're bored or you're off moving somewhere else. And so that's
Well, yeah. The other thing is, I probably should have. I actually don't have senior in any of my titles, but I've worked at startups as a solo designer, which, and I've also led volunteer teams. And so the disconnect, I think, for the recruiters is that I'm capable of leading a team, but I wouldn't be leading a team in that position. But to me, I'm like, I would prefer not to have the stress of of leading a team. I just want to do the design work.
Yeah. Wait, so did I hear you correctly? So this position wouldn't be leading a team, but the fact that you have
No,
lead experience, you feel
yes,
like you might be overqualified. You might be signaling that you're overqualified for it,
yes. And
or
also
setting it.
because I've been the solo designer for like the last two positions, and they were really small startups. And so the last time I had a larger team that I worked on was like 5 years ago. And so to them, they're thinking, oh, you've like called all the shots. I don't know how. That's what I think they think is like, oh, you're used to working by yourself for the last 5 years. So putting you back in a larger team, you might not be happy being in the middle.
So I assume you've been working with a recruiter. Is it an internal recruiter or an external recruiter?
It was an internal recruiter in both instances. And they asked me the question, and I told them how I felt about it, but somehow I didn't get put to the next round for that.
Yeah. Did you have a sense of what their why you were disqualified or why they passed on you?
Well, for
Or
the
did,
last one,
did they tell you explicitly or did they share any of that with you?
they didn't tell me explicitly in the email, but I know that for the last one, they had asked my referral person what my range was before they sent me the invite for the phone interview,
Your
which
range
means
in terms
a
of
salary.
compensation. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because they were like, "Oh, she seems like a senior and this is a mid position.
Mm,
Can you, how do you feel she feels about the range for the salary?" And
yeah,
since this person knows me pretty well, like we worked closely together in a previous job, he just told me that. So, which
yeah,
is super helpful feedback. So when I talked to the recruiter, I made a point of saying that I wanted the stability of a larger company and not a startup, and that's what I was going for. And I mean, not that I didn't care about salary, but I cared more about the work I'd be doing versus salary.
yeah. So actually, that's a good point. So that's as a recruiter, that's something that's important to me, right? That you care about the work, you care about you care about the company, their mission, the product, the service, their stage of maturity, right? And it's not just about, oh, like well, obviously not just about the paycheck, but I mean, you don't want, and that may be the reality these days, right? That it
Hmm.
is about the paycheck, right? Because if it wasn't about the paycheck and the role's too small for you, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd be just like, okay, it's not the right role. Let's just move on. But right now, the reality is like there's a lot of folks out there that are struggling to find a paycheck, much less something that's like the ideal fit that inspires them
Hmm.
and this and that, right? And so, and I think a lot of people know that, but I think as a again, sort of going back to the recruiter mindset, if I see somebody that is passionate, like there's some sort of connection that I feel like they have with the company or the mission or the stage of the company or they're serving whatever ICP, like that for me, like it signals like there's a deeper connection, and if you can find that connection, um, ideally find it versus fabricate it, eh, you know, that would be ideal, right? If you could find the connection that's between you and that opportunity and the company or the culture, that would be ideal. And if you can let that shine and let that come out and let the recruiters see that, I think that would be beneficial,
Okay.
you know?
I think I did, but I think maybe I didn't sell it as well as I could have. I don't know. I'll practice that.
Yeah. And just as a thing too, like I don't know how many points of contact did you have with the recruiter throughout the process?
I'd say two.
Two like Zooms or two phone calls?
Oh, no, just one phone call, but like a couple of emails before and after.
Okay. So every one of those touch points is a good opportunity for you to, continue establishing rapport to signal kind of your position, your interest and all that. I mean, I think that goes without saying, but I should say it because you don't want to miss out on an opportunity if you're not doing that already. Also, it's an opportunity to kind of solicit feedback along the way, right?
Mm.
It shouldn't be this thing where you go through the interview process and then all of a sudden at the end, oh, now can I have some feedback? And so yeah, so every touch point is an opportunity to give and get, right?
Hmm.
What recruiters are interested in, they're interested in understanding, at least me, I'm interested in understanding the candidate's experience throughout the process. I'm interested in their perspective of how Mr. Hiring Manager or Mrs. Hiring Manager is interviewing. I'm interested in how that maybe that junior person on the team is interviewing, right? So I can help refine the interview process. So that candid feedback from a candidate to me as a recruiter is helpful. When you say that, this is my experience and I can understand that. So that's something that's valuable to the recruiter, right? Because a recruiter, a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, it just depends. Um, they are interested, obviously, in the short term, filling this position, but they're also interested in refining the interview process and the candidate experience. So it's like, and so for the recruiter, that's kind of like their product, right?
Hmm.
And if you give me feedback on my product, it helps me develop my product better. And so that's valuable to me. So give and get. You give me some feedback on your experience as a candidate, um, and maybe I give you more feedback, or you build some rapport with me, and I can give you a little bit more insight. And there's a little bit more, there's a little bit more sharing that can be established there, right? So yeah, that's one. I mean, that's one thing that's valuable to a recruiter. It depends on the recruiter, you know. So as an example, I asked earlier, internal or external recruiter. So I've largely served the role as an external recruiter. There have been some situations where, we're basically like turnkey, like recruiting operations for a client, and we effectively are the internal/external recruiter for a given client. But most of our engagements have been external recruiting sort of positions, and especially if a recruiter is first time working with a hiring manager or with a company, they might not have insight into who's who in the recruiting process, in the interview process. And so, if you as a candidate can give them insight into that, it's quite valuable.
Hmm.
If yeah, if you can give them insight into who might not be a seasoned recruiter or interviewer, or who might need some help in terms of uh, coaching that interviewer, that's valuable to a recruiter.
Okay.
And yet,
Thank you
I
so
guess
much.
you have to be sensitive too about how you deliver that, because it might come across as
Yeah.
like maybe you bashing their process or something like that. So you should be careful with it.
I usually try to be positive and then
Yeah,
give a little bit of critical feedback.
yeah, yeah. So I hope that helps, Anita.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So Eric, I want to ask, how would as a manager, so after the interview, and is it okay to connect them on LinkedIn or is it not? Because I don't know what's the boundary
What's the
basically
etiquette? Yeah.
yeah,
So connecting with the hiring manager, you're asking you after an interview?
after the interview. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally, I mean, etiquette wise, it's totally appropriate. I would even suggest doing it before an interview, you know? If you find out, so a lot of times, the recruiter will share with you, and if they don't share with you who you're interviewing with, you should ask, and because it signals that you're conscientious and you want to prepare, you want to know who you're talking with, right? And
Mhm.
so, ideally, I mean, most recruiters will share who you're talking with,
No, we
but if
do
they,
know, yeah, but I just don't know whether it's like it shows like too desperate if you connect before and even after, because I don't know, because yeah, so I just don't know how they feel that, oh,
no, I don't think it signals any desperation at all. For me,
mm,
as a recruiter, if somebody's reaching out and trying to connect, I mean, I guess it depends how you message it, right? I mean, you could easily signal desperation in a desperate message. But if
mhm,
your message is about connecting with them and wanting to get to know them and saying, hey, I'm interviewing with you next week, really excited about it. If you have some relevant questions, I think better if you've done a little bit of getting to know that person online, like looking at what they're posting, what they're excited about, maybe some of the content that they've written, and if it resonates with you, you can kind of riff off that. But yeah, I don't think it just in and of itself, I don't think it signals any desperation, at least in my
right.
opinion.
So generally after the interview, I mean, I guess most managers are just really educated not to interact with the candidates, it's just not to be any bias. So that's where I feel that, okay, even though that I reached out, they may just kind of remain neutral or remain silent. So I don't know whether that will further kind of like
That's
um
interesting. That might exist. I mean, what you're saying is that, they might be maybe coached or encouraged not to engage with candidates that are in process.
mhm.
Uh, I've never seen that before, at least not formally, where someone is standardizing a process and saying, hey, if you're interviewing with folks, don't engage with them offline. Just stay within the guardrails of the process. I haven't seen that before. Not to say it
Right,
doesn't exist,
right.
right? And so, I mean, yeah, I would take every opportunity you can to, connect in if there's no response from somebody like a hiring manager that you're trying to connect with on LinkedIn, for example, chances are it's probably because they're not in LinkedIn all the time or they're just busy.
Mm.
I That's probably more likely than them being guided by HR or by head of recruiting saying, "Hey, don't interact with candidates outside of our process while they're in
Mm.
process." I think
Yeah.
that's less likely.
That's what I was coached by HR when I was hiring, right? So just don't
Yeah,
interact, and that's everything has to go through them. So that's why I was thinking, is
yeah,
it useful at all to reach out and just to connect? I mean, I'm not really even asking about the status, just to connect, right? So I
yeah,
just don't, I've been not doing it.
yeah.
And even
I guess
sending
I'm.
a thank you note, HR doesn't like you to send directly to the manager, just send it to me. I will tell the manager. So it's just almost like is very protective.
It depends on the culture too. Culture of the company. A lot of times the size of the company. If the company's larger, they might have policies and procedures in place that insulate the hiring managers from, I don't know, from like candidates or something like that. So it depends on the culture. A lot of times it depends on the size of the company. Yeah. So you just have to know kind of environment you're dealing with. Yeah. Any other scenarios or situations?
Hey Eric, it's Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Hey, thanks for the invite to join you here.
Sure.
I am coming from the social impact space, particularly corporate social responsibility. And so, as you can imagine, there's like a lot of churn in our field right now. And so I got the suggestion to actually speak with recruiters, particularly external recruiters,
Yeah.
about kind of where they see the fit being going forward, my skill, for my skills or for my background. And I don't know any external recruiters besides you, because I haven't had to look for a job in 10 years. And so
Right.
I just wanted to get your take on that in particular, like that approach, or are like, are recruiters open to being asked, like, what do you see in the market? And, um, you know,
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the recruiter, obviously, but recruiters that are employed, they tend to be, especially now, they tend to be quite busy because a lot of companies are just generally downsizing their recruiting teams, and I think a lot of them are expecting a bit more from their existing teams. Um, and recruiters tend to be just inundated. Like a lot of times they're managing multiple inboxes, multiple requisitions, multiple pipelines with, it could be hundreds of folks that they're going through for each pipeline. And so it's just quite a reactive, many ways could be a very reactive kind of environment that recruiters are working in. And so they tend to be very like, okay, what's on my desk? If it's urgent, I'll take a look at it. If it's not urgent, I'll just kick the can down the street, right?
yeah.
And so it depends on the recruiter, you know, but I mean, at least anecdotally, a lot of folks just struggle to get any time with a recruiter. And that's part of why I do this too, because I know that people have struggled with that, and even for myself, it's hard to take like one-on-one calls, and so that's why I try to cover a little bit more ground. And a lot of times I get asked the same question, so at least in this forum, it's okay because at least more people are. And I'm recording this, and I put this on YouTube, and so folks can kind of watch it, and hopefully whatever I'm sharing can get out to more people. So I don't know if that's helpful, Christine. In terms of your experience in, social corporate responsibility and how that might port over to, so sort of new positions. The pivot is one of the hardest things, and I don't know if there's a magical formula to it other than really taking a deep inventory of what skills you have, what, sort of that, that what you're passionate about doing, and sort of finding that fit with what the market will pay and all that. And that's sort of the part of the exercise that you go through with the Never Search Alone, playbook.
Mm.
Um, I hope this is helpful.
Yeah, it is actually. Sorry, I am doing the Never Search Alone. I just wasn't sure if it was appropriate to call out by name. But yeah, that is the advice. So thanks.
Yeah. It's tough out there. Somebody that's doing a pivot, you're competing with other folks that are not pivoting. And, for somebody that's pivoting, it is a bit of a risk for the recruiter,
Yeah.
right?
I'm looking at it more from a less of a pivot, true pivot, and more of a like broadening. Because what I did was really focus because I work for a large enough company, I was able to have like a narrow space to work in. I did
Mhm.
employee volunteer and giving, and there's a way to broaden that space out to be employee engagement or more in the philanthropy area, where I have fingerlings of experience, but the deep experience was in a pretty narrow space. So yeah, just looking for like what roles are out there, how is this space growing?
The funny thing is that it's what we're seeing here. I think we were talking a little bit about this earlier in the call. Is that everything seems to be a bit of a moving target, and even if you're trying to pivot, just hypothetically, let's say you're trying to pivot into account management or something, right? Like what it means to be an account manager today is different, and it's moving from what it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even, I don't know, maybe even a year ago, right? And what account management means is going to be different in 6 months and a year. So, like, I think it's challenging because the pivot in and of itself is difficult. But when you're trying to pivot into something that's evolving, sort of a moving target, I'm not sure if I have a prescription for that. I think one of these I came out of my conversation with this woman the other day, and she's a prospective podcast guest, is this idea of sort of everyone being an entrepreneur and
Hmm.
just tightening up the loop, tightening up the loop of you being this black box where you take input, resources, energy, and you're spitting out a product or a service, right? And you in and of yourself. Whereas before, like, you require organizations to do that, multiple people within that black box to do that. Now we can do it as an individual. I think it was Sam Altman that was saying, he was talking about this idea of the first $1 billion, the first one person $1 billion company, right? And it's, I mean, that sounds absurd, like
Yeah.
whatever, 10 years ago or whatever, 5 years ago, but now you can start to envision how that might be a reality at some point, because, if you're one person that is orchestrating agents now, like you effectively have an organization that could create that kind of value,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
presumably, right?
interesting. I
Like,
think it also kind of ties back to what you were saying about being, going to being a more generalist and with our skills, right? If you think about, you know, being that entrepreneur, that one person doing all the roles, maybe with some AI coverage and things like
yeah,
that, that it could be really interesting. And of course, transferable skills are always important. And when you're making those pivots, relying on that is where you go
yeah,
to.
yeah.
So, all
I
right,
think a
great.
lot, I don't know, I think a lot of us have to kind of just, I don't know, relax those connections in our brain a little bit. I know that I have to do that. Um, and just, gosh, get ready for change, you
Coming
know?
is
So
here.
it's already here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some questions here in the chat here. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at it. Um, yeah, let's see, when I need to drop the senior from my title. Yeah, so titles, right? They're a proxy for they're a proxy for experience scope. They're a proxy for a scope of role, duties, responsibilities. They're a proxy for sort of progression. Like as a recruiter, when I look at a resume, I can look at titles quickly and kind of get a feel at least without looking at all the details of the person's trajectory. And so yeah, I think when you look at your resume, if the trajectory, if the story, the narrative is reading in one way that is clearly not consistent with a particular position, you already have that headwind of trying to fit into there, right? Um, so again, I'm not suggesting you fabricate your titles, which actually brings up another thing. So people have asked me this before, like as far as titles, and what you might be called within the company versus how you might convey that on your resume. And so and is it how do you say unethical? Is it unethical to change your title on your resume if that wasn't your sort of HR title at the company? And how would I as a recruiter like what would be my opinion about that? Again, for me, the title is a proxy for the actual scope of responsibility in your experience, right? So if you tell me you're a product manager, but meanwhile your scope of responsibility is all sales, it's like I see like it doesn't really match up, right? And I guess you could make an argument there, but I'm just trying to illustrate a point. Um, and so for me as a recruiter, like you're I would I would be inclined to I would be inclined to say that as long as your title matches with the scope of responsibility, like your actual responsibilities and duties, I think you're fine. Like I wouldn't hold that against you, if you modified it, especially if the title was some sort of obscure internal lingo title that most people outside of the company might not recognize. I would definitely consider um, modifying that on your resume. Um, let's see. Any other questions? I'm just kind of looking through the comments here.
Hey, Eric, it's Carl.
Hey, Carl.
Hey, so if you are leading an external search for, you know, uh, fill a position, how do you go about it? What's sort of the process you go through in terms of figuring out who to reach out to?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if I'm leading internal search, let's say for a client, let's just start from the top. Like if I don't know, if I've never worked with a client before, we do a lot of research about the client, right? Who their competitors are. And so all this research is done so that we can promote the opportunity. We need to be able to speak intelligently about the opportunity, right? And that goes beyond just a job description, right? A lot of times what we're recruiting for is not just like they're mission critical positions. So we need to be able to sell far beyond just a job description. In order to sell the opportunity, we need to know what the opportunity is about. We need to know about the team. So everything today, where the team has been today, where they were yesterday, the team, the company, the founders, the investors, the product, the market, the traction, the headwinds, the skeletons in the closet, all that stuff. Like we go pretty deep with the clients, right? And I want to know the hiring manager. What's their experience with hiring, right? So we try to go really, really, really deep to understand all of this stuff, right? And then we in some way sometimes depending on the client we get involved with sort of organizational design because sometimes they don't know like like we need more help here, but we don't really know, is this a senior person, a mid-level person? Should I hire two mid-level persons or one senior person? Like should I hire, so sometimes we get involved with that. And we even sometimes have influence in terms of the budget, right? And so depending on the recruiter, they can have a lot of influence on how an organization, depending on the stage of the company and how the where the company is. Especially us because we've been working with earlier stage startups, right? They get their first Series A. They have, I mean, these might be the days of past, but they close a $20 million deal. They need to double their headcount from 20 to 40 or 20 to 60 people, right? And so, anyway, we go deep in terms of understanding the company, who they are, where they've been, where they want to go, trying to understand the culture. And a lot of times the culture is not static, especially at that stage. So where they are today culturally and where they aspire to be tomorrow, right? And a lot of
Yep.
times the culture is a function of the leadership at that stage, but and the next hire can influence that. The next hire can influence the culture and the direction. So anyway, so we go through all that. We put together a job description. There's some iteration on that. You know, we socialize that internally, make sure that people are on board. We try to sniff out any misalignment about what the company or the team or the hiring managers might be looking for, right? So it's quite an involved process. And then we will design an interview process, assuming they don't have one, or we might tweak it if they have one that, you know, was just sort of ad hoc put together. And then we start marketing the opportunity. We also do like employer branding. So we want to make sure that the touch points that the digital touch points that a candidate might encounter for the company, that they're all consistent. They're all so a lot of what you guys are doing as job seekers, we do on the employer side as well. We want to make sure they have a cohesive narrative. We want to make sure that their brand, their reviews, that they're all tip top, right? We want to make sure their LinkedIn profile is great. If it's like if they have uh, you know, the hiring managers, for example, we want to make sure their LinkedIn profiles are attractive, right? And so the context I'm giving you here is maybe from a few years ago where we were going after people and we had to get the really good people, we had to go and source them. Like
Yep.
they weren't applying. So we had to be hungry on the employer side and make sure because we were competing with other employers, right? So we had to make again, I know the pendulum swings, but everything that the job seekers are doing now, like we had to do as employers or consultants helping employers, right? And so we do all that marketing. We have to make sure that the candidate experience is great, and that even if we're rejecting folks, which is inevitable, that they walk away with a great experience telling their friends and writing great reviews on Glassdoor and this and that, right? So we were very concerned about that. Very, very concerned about that. And so, and then, so again, we would post a job in through different channels to market it, and we'd get some inbound, right? But a lot of times, years ago, a lot of times hiring managers were looking more for folks they were very specific about what they're looking for. So we'd actually have to go and source those folks. And sourcing is actually, knocking on the door of candidates that are gainfully and happily employed. And a lot of times they don't want to talk to a recruiter. So it's the same thing, right? Like I have to go network with them. I have to go, try to connect with their buddies or their boss or whatever, right? Like on LinkedIn, you have to get kind of scrappy, but from the other side, right? And so,
How do you, can I ask a clarifying question here, please? So how do you figure out who to reach out to, right? I don't know, you're hiring for some position. There's thousands of people out there on LinkedIn with that title or that
yeah,
experience.
yeah,
What do
sure.
you do?
So, LinkedIn has largely been used as sort of the de facto directory of talent. Most employers and third-party recruiting agencies have their own applicant tracking system, their own ATS. So they have their own database of folks. And a lot of times, we've been around for over 12 years. And so we accumulate folks that we've worked with in the past. So that's usually our first stop. It's like,
Yep.
oh, I'm looking for a director of engineering, right? Software engineering. Let me go look in my database. And then if I don't find anybody, then I'll go to LinkedIn, right? And then go to LinkedIn, you start to craft sort of a like a profile of what you're looking for, right? Maybe somebody local, maybe somebody with, and these profiles are, I use the word archetype, right? So, and a lot of this comes from, sort of that discovery that we do with the hiring team, the hiring manager, our understanding of the culture, and there's certain archetypes that sort of that surface, right? That are kind of aligned with the culture, and these are things that a lot of folks either they're talking about explicitly within the company. Like some of them look for high potentials, right? These are the folks that are, on the resume you see every year they're just getting a title progression or something like that, right? And these are high potentials, right? And some clients they speak about archetypes like very directly, explicitly in those ways, and some don't. And like part of it is like we have to kind of tease that out, right? And so sometimes they'll just tell us, "Oh, we're looking for high potentials." Oh, what does that mean? Okay,
Mhm.
and others are just like they're just kind of describing what they think they're looking for. So anyway, archetypes, and that's something that by the way, I alluded to this earlier, and actually, Carl, you're working with me on this. I alluded to this earlier. We're developing a sort of an automated process to review resumes from the lens of a recruiter and slash hiring manager. And archetypes is one of those modules that we have, an archetypal analysis of your resume, because it's really handy to kind of understand what archetypal signals are being sent through your resume. And I was just using that one example, right? Maybe a more negative um, archetype is like the job hopper, right? That
Yep.
person that's switched jobs every 6 months or whatever, right? And so that's a good analysis to do on your resume. And so anyway, getting back to your question, Carl, we go to LinkedIn with sort of this sort of profile in mind of what we're looking for. We have like a Boolean search, and then we just, we start building a list, and then you just start going down the list, and then you start to refine. There's a calibration step too, right? So typically we'll just go search for LinkedIn, or maybe look in our own ATS, come up with a list of three, four, maybe five prospective candidates, and we circulate that very quickly to the hiring manager or to the team. How does this person look? How does this person look? What do you like? What do you don't like? And sometimes there's a calibration where we have to actually go back and maybe massage the job description a little bit. But anyway, we're refining our profile of what we're looking for, and then we just go back a little bit iterative sometimes, and then we build a list again, and then we just start reaching out to these folks, right? And maybe the next question is like, why would you reach out to one person versus another, right? So in those examples, like what I was describing, where we have to source the candidates, um, the person that just started a job, maybe a few months ago, 6 months ago, within a year, probably less inclined to take a phone call, right? They're just getting started, right? Um, so we might deprioritize those folks. The person that's been at their company for 3, 4 years, we might prioritize those folks, all things being equal, right?
Yep.
So we kind of go through that mental sorting, right? Because you're trying to manage your time in terms of effort. And so again, in a world where a lot of times the candidates didn't make time to talk to a recruiter, we had to, sort of triage or prioritize our time, right? Who's more likely to talk to us, right?
Yep.
Reach out to them on LinkedIn, maybe try to find their email address. Again, this is kind of the analog, the other side, right?
Yep.
Um, maybe try to engage with their content on LinkedIn, right? We were doing that too. And then just try to get them on a phone call. Yeah,
Okay.
that was the thing. Just trying to get them on a phone call. You're not trying to sell the opportunity in the email or the LinkedIn.
Right.
You're not selling them on the opportunity. You're selling them on the phone call.
Right.
It's
One
too
step
it's
at a
too far of a
time.
jump. It's too far of a
Yeah.
jump to go to sell them on a phone call, to sell them on the opportunity. You have to sell them just jump on a call with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That was super
Yeah.
helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Excuse me. Let's see. Okay. That's all I got for today, you guys. I think we went a little bit over time, but I hope it was helpful. And I'll do this every week. And yeah, reach out if there's anything I can help with.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay,
All
thanks,
Always
right.
Eric.
appreciate this call.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Have a
See
great
ya.
week. All right. Bye.